In today's video, I'll be recreating an old Necromunda gang, the Ratskins, using the Claws of Karanak warband. The first thing I want to do with these guys is to remove the fur on their backs, and for several reasons. First, I'll be adding other bits with different fur, and I don't want a bunch of different textures. Secondly, this spiky fur is gonna be impossible to paint well. There's no room to blend, and it'll just end up looking like porcupine quills. Thirdly, I'd prefer tanned leather instead of fur. And by removing the fur, but keeping the shape, I can achieve just that. Any blemishes can be fixed later with putty. These models have a lot of ornate chaos trim, and that won't work on a gang of scavengers living at the bottom levels of the hive. So the trim needs to go. By focusing on removing the edge of the trim, I can make it appear as if the metal has a curve to it. And any roughness will make it look like the metal has been worked over with a hammer. I gap fill this later. I remove the Karanak loincloths, which I replace later. For this gang, I'm using the profile of the Ash Wastes Nomads and naturally their weapons upgrade kit. And this guy, the Chief or the Katragi Chieftain, uses a stub revolver and a monohook. I added the revolver by simply removing the original axe and hand. By cutting and dremeling into the wrist under the armor, the gun slots in perfectly. For the monohook, I first remove the little stump of the arm and then cut the sleeve into a shape that fits into the socket. I keep using Chaos Marauder heads and I'm running out. All this hair needs to go or the head won't fit. Once the head is in place, it's time to add that signature rat skin fashion. These rat heads are from Kritza, the rat prince. And as one of those Kitbash moments, my gang has 7 members and there are exactly 7 rat heads in the kit. Amazing. Once cut to shape, I flatten the sheep's head and glue the rat head on. To replace the loincloth, I took another from the Jackal kit, a leftover from the video where I made 5 different Imperial Guard regiments. A video that did rather well, and thanks everyone who watched it. Once the loincloth fits, I glue it in place. A lot of the weapons in the Claws of Karanak kit has these tufts of hair, so I had the idea to add them peeking out from the hood I'll sculpt later. Perhaps it's a tradition among the Ratskins that the men let this one braid of hair grow out, almost like a rat tail. My gang is equipped with a long rifle, a charge caster, a autogun, 2 blast carbines, and 1 web gun. For the long rifle, I grabbed this really long one from a Skitari kit and removed the middle section to shorten it a bit. I replaced the barrel for a slimmer one, which I of course drilled. I grabbed a Space Marine scope and flattened the attachment point for a stronger bond. To get the arms in place, I went through the same cutting and trimming as on the chieftain. This was done to all 7 models. Alright, the dude with the charge caster. A charge caster is essentially a rocket launcher. Rather than building a custom rocket launcher from scratch, which I could have done, I thought it'd be more fitting the low-tech scavenger feel if he simply lobbed grenades with a leather sling. So I filled his belt to the brim with various nades. For the sling arm, I removed the axe and then drilled a hole to remove the axe shaft. I then glued in the arm. I replaced the hand of the other arm with an open one from the Ash Wastes Nomad's weapons upgrade kit. To create the sling, I started with an armature of steel wire. After cutting a length, I wrap it around the big grenade and dab on some superglue with a toothpick. Now I can bend the whole thing into a shape that shows its mid-throw. Once it's glued into the hand, I can create the actual sling. I wrap a flattened strip of putty around the wire and work it until it covers the entire armature. Once cured, I can give it a more squared shape to look like a strip of leather. When removing the fur on all the models, I ended up having to fix and recreate some parts. Like on the sheath, I need to add the part of the leather that's draped across his armor. I make sure it has a smooth connection with the plastic and any previous gap filling. The part draping needs a jagged and tattered look. I bridged the gap between the rat head and the draped leathers by creating a hood. Rather than going for the full hood in one go, something that is impossible to do if you want to control the flow of the shape, I start by focusing on the inside of the hood and the back of it. Then, after curing, I can build on it and sculpt the rest. This is a mistake a lot of people do when learning to sculpt. They try to do the whole thing in one go. You often get better results when dividing the job into more than one session. Obviously, the rat heads don't match the size of the hides. So to show that the rat heads are sewn onto the hides as decoration, I separate them by adding the fur of the rat. I start with a sausage of putty and make it look less like a putty sausage and more like a putty slug. Then to create the fur texture, I use this sort of knife-shaped silicone shaper. I just do a bunch of random vertical lines at first. After that, I make the lines cross the vertical lines at a slight diagonal. Doing this, tufts will emerge on their own and I can define them with more intention. Next, I separate some of the tufts at the bottom and then flip my knife to the blunt side and deepen some of the lines. Alright, time for some speed painting. This will use an airbrush and oil paint. Now, relax your sphincter. This can be done with a brush and regular washes, but it will take longer, which kind of slows down the whole speed painting thing. The airbrushing is done in a progression starting with German black brown, then flat brown, and a zenithal of ice yellow, all Vallejo colors. The advantage of the airbrush and the old wash is that it uses the shape of the model itself to get the result. You need no skill to do it. After the airbrush, I base the metals. They will be washed too. Then I thin out some contrast colors and apply them in long, smooth brush strokes, trying to carry the pooling liquid with me as I go. Some staining isn't a problem, as tanned leather itself leaves stains when it gets wet. I painted the pants too, but reworked them later, so it was pointless in hindsight. I paint the rat furs in various browns, but also black and for the sheath gray. To create an oil wash, you of course need oil paint, but for anyone who for some reason don't like the thinners, there is oil paint which you can thin with water. But it's not as good and you still need isopropanol to clean your brush. I want a dark brown wash, so mix brown and black. Two things. Oil paint always looks darker until spread thin, and despite being called an oil wash, the consistency of an oil wash should be more like regular paint. Don't worry, it looks like you just ruined your model when slabbing it on, but it's fine. Once the wash is applied, I recommend to wait about 2 hours. This is where the magic happens. Oil paint can be removed, and doing so will produce a smooth gradient from mid-tone into shadow. First, you remove the worst of it with some Q-tips, leaving the deepest recesses alone. Then you can use these makeup applicators to remove even more. You can even dip the applicator in some oil paint thinner, and this way remove even more from the highlighted areas. What you end up with is a beautiful, smooth and blended mid-tone to shadow, which you can then start highlighting on top of. To start the highlighting, I do some sponging, which will add a little bit of texture. I'm using flat brown from Vallejo, which I then also glaze for a smoother transition. I then do some scratchy highlights with Citadel Scrag Brown, which I also glaze for some brighter highlights. Another tip when it comes to speed painting is to use the same colors for different areas of the model, thus saving time on adding new colors and possibly mixing on your palette. To add rust to the metal, I glaze in some thinned German black brown and then again the flat brown. I then use less thinned scrag brown to add some spots of brighter rust. Then to complete the look, I add scratchy highlights and cuts with Vallejo Model Air Silver. The key to making a model that is speed painted look better painted than it is to put extra time into key details, the face being a good choice. As humans, we look at the faces first and for longer than other parts of a person. I love painting faces, and the sheath will get a sort of Native American skin tone. Thus we start with a reddish brown base of German black brown and burnt red, which we add to by mixing in about 50-50 cavalry brown. We only keep the previous layer in the darkest areas such as under the brow, under the nose and jaw. Then we add about 2 to 1 parts of tan from Vallejo, which is a big jump, but that's by design. We paint the forehead, the nose, cheeks, his Ron Perlman-sized upper lips, and the side of the face and lower jaw. Then to bring it back, we make a glaze of the previous mix and cover everything. This does two things. It blends the edge between the two previous layers and tone down the brightness of the previous layer. Next, we use the same bright paint but cover a smaller area on this pass. For the forehead, we focus on the brow and highlight the sides of the forehead. Then we do a big round highlight on the forehead, favoring one side for a light glare. For the nose, we highlight the tip, the ridge and the nostrils. On the side in the light, the tip and the nostril is connected. Next layer, we forego the previous mix and mix 50-50 pale flesh and tan. And we highlight a smaller area, further defining the brow, sides of the forehead, adding a wrinkle between the eyebrows. The bags under the eye stand out, so we add a highlight to them, but doing it at this point ensures the area of the cheeks are bright enough. When highlighting the shin, we favor the upper corner on the side facing the light. Again, we pull it back with the previous mix. Another reason for doing this glazing is that a darker, and in this case a redder color, will add saturation over a brighter layer. This staves off desaturation by the whiter colors and adds warmth to the face. Again, we go over the face with the previous highlight, but now we focus on the brightest highlights on the forehead, nose, cheeks, chin, and upper lip. Before we do the last highlight, I apply a color filter by mixing my first layer color with burnt red. A color filter is thinner than a glaze and applied with not much liquid in the brush. It's not a wash. Make sure it doesn't pool and cover the area equally. A few passes of this ties all the layers of the face together, combats any desaturation and adds a bit of warmth. Then we can touch up the most prominent highlights with the previous highlight color. Lastly, we add 2 parts pale flesh to our previous mix for the last specular highlights. As a last touch, by having already added a specular highlight to the lips, we can set them apart by adding a glaze of pure burnt red to the sides of the lower lip and along the recess of the upper lip. I varied the skin tones of this gang rather than lock them all into one ethnicity. Here's all 7 of them. I also gave some of them a magenta OSL to add a splash of color to an otherwise earthy color scheme. This is the first time I have created something actually playable. Sure might not be the best setup, and yes, the bases are larger, but the rule of cool wins every time. Now I just need to find someone to play with. Hope you enjoyed this video. Maybe you feel inspired to create your own Necromunda gang. I've enjoyed it. See you next time. Bye.